Ladies and gentlemen, we come before the Father with humble hearts, acknowledging that there are battles we cannot win by human effort. There are struggles too deep, pressures too heavy, and situations beyond our wisdom and strength. Today, we surrender them to God, the one who never loses a fight. Father, take over every unseen battle, every silent warfare, every burden carried in secret. Let your power replace our weakness. Let your peace silence fear, and let your authority speak where our voices have failed. We trust you as our defender, our refuge, and our victory in every season of life. Acknowledging human weakness before God begins with an honest recognition that strength, intelligence, experience, and determination all have limits. Many people are trained to project confidence, to appear self-sufficient, and to hide vulnerability. Yet before God, pretense carries no power. True spiritual progress starts when a person admits, without excuse or pride, that there are moments when ability fails and endurance runs out. This acknowledgement is not a confession of defeat, but a declaration of truth. And truth is the doorway through which divine help flows. When a person stands before God and admits weakness, they step out of self-deception and into alignment with heaven's reality. Human weakness is not an accident. It is part of design. Mortality itself is evidence that humans were never meant to be self-sustaining. From the beginning, humanity was created to depend on God, to draw strength, wisdom, and direction from Him daily. When this dependence is ignored, life becomes a burden carried by human effort alone, and the weight of responsibility slowly crushes the soul. Acknowledging weakness restores the original order where God leads and humans respond. It shifts the burden from human shoulders to divine hands, where it was always meant to rest. Many battles expose weakness in ways comfort never does. Pressure reveals what confidence hides. In seasons of calm, it is easy to believe strength is sufficient, but when challenges persist beyond effort, weakness becomes undeniable. These moments are not punishments, they are invitations. God uses situations beyond strength to draw hearts back to Him, not in shame, but in trust. When a person finally admits, "I cannot handle this," they open space for God to intervene, because divine power is not attracted to self-confidence, but to humility. Acknowledging weakness before God also requires silence. Not the absence of words, but the stillness of the heart that stops arguing, stops defending, and stops pretending. In that quiet honesty, excuses fall away and comparison loses its grip. There is no need to explain failure or justify fear. God already sees the full picture. What He seeks is not explanation, but surrender. Weakness admitted becomes a prayer, even without words, a cry that reaches heaven faster than eloquent speech. This acknowledgement dismantles pride, not through humiliation, but through clarity. Pride insists on control, on managing outcomes, on appearing capable even when breaking inside. Weakness confessed releases the need to perform. It allows the soul to rest in the truth that God is not impressed by strength and not disappointed by weakness. He responds to trust. When weakness is acknowledged, trust naturally follows because reliance shifts from self to God. There is also courage in admitting weakness. It takes bravery to confront limits, to admit confusion, exhaustion, and fear. Many people collapse, not because they are weak, but because they refuse to admit they are. Denial drains more energy than struggle. When weakness is acknowledged before God, the burden of pretending disappears, and the heart becomes lighter even before circumstances change. Peace begins where honesty begins. Acknowledging weakness before God changes how prayer sounds. Prayer becomes less about commanding outcomes and more about seeking help. It becomes relational rather than transactional. Instead of approaching God with a list of demands, the heart approaches him with dependence. This kind of prayer carries depth because it is rooted in reality, not aspiration. God responds powerfully to prayers that arise from genuine need. This acknowledgement also corrects perspective. It reminds the soul that life is not a test of personal strength, but a journey of divine partnership. Weakness reveals the areas where God desires involvement. Every admitted limitation marks a point of divine entry. Where strength ends, grace begins. Where understanding fails, wisdom is supplied. Where endurance collapses, supernatural strength is released. In acknowledging weakness, comparison loses meaning. There is no need to measure life against others because the focus shifts from human standards to divine sufficiency. What others appear to handle easily may be the very thing that overwhelms someone else, and that difference does not indicate failure. God deals with individuals, not averages. Weakness acknowledged personalizes the relationship with God, making faith intimate rather than performative. This acknowledgement reshapes identity. Instead of defining self by capability, success, or resilience, identity becomes rooted in being sustained by God. A person no longer needs to prove worth through strength because value is already established through relationship. This produces emotional stability because identity is no longer threatened by failure or struggle. When weakness is acknowledged before God, obedience becomes easier. There is less resistance, less negotiation, and less fear of outcomes. Trust grows because the heart understands it is not responsible for carrying the full weight of results. God does not ask humans to be strong enough for the future, only humble enough to follow him into it. Acknowledging weakness also invites transformation. God does not merely compensate for weakness, he walks through it to refine character. Dependence produces patience, humility produces wisdom, and surrender produces peace. The process itself reshapes the inner life, aligning desires with divine purpose rather than personal ambition. This posture of acknowledgement must be continual, not occasional. Weakness is not a one-time discovery but a daily reality. Each day brings new demands, new uncertainties, and new limitations. Daily acknowledgement keeps the heart soft and receptive. It prevents the slow return of self-reliance that disconnects the soul from grace. Ultimately, acknowledging human weakness before God restores balance to life. It frees the heart from unrealistic expectations, releases the mind from constant pressure, and opens the spirit to divine support. It allows God to be God and humans to be human, fully aware of their limits and fully confident in his limitless power. Trusting him not because strength is sufficient, but because he is sufficient. Total surrender of overwhelming battles begins when a person reaches the point where resistance no longer makes sense. There are struggles that refuse to respond to effort, problems that outgrow strategy, and pressures that remain even after prayer, planning, and persistence. In such moments, surrender is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is the conscious decision to release control and place the weight of the battle into God's hands. Surrender acknowledges that some conflicts are not meant to be managed by human strength, but resolved by divine authority. Overwhelming battles often arrive quietly. They build over time through unanswered questions, delayed expectations, and repeated disappointments. At first, they seem manageable, something discipline or determination can fix. But gradually, the emotional toll increases, clarity fades, and fatigue sets in. The heart becomes heavy, and the mind grows restless. Total surrender begins when a person stops minimizing the weight of the battle and admits its magnitude before God. It is in that honesty that surrender becomes possible. Surrender requires releasing the illusion of control. Many people struggle not because God is absent, but because they are holding too tightly to outcomes. Control offers a sense of security, even when it fails. Letting go feels risky because it requires trust without guarantees. Yet faith is not built on guarantees. It is built on confidence in God's character. When control is released, space is created for God to act in ways human effort never could. This surrender is not passive resignation. It is an active decision to trust God's involvement more than personal intervention. It means choosing prayer over panic, trust over manipulation, and patience over anxiety. Total surrender shifts the role of the heart from striving to resting, from forcing to yielding. The battle does not disappear instantly, but the burden changes hands. Overwhelming battles often expose emotional attachments to outcomes. Surrender involves laying those attachments down, not because the desire is wrong, but because the heart cannot carry both desire and control without breaking. God does not ask people to stop caring. He asks them to stop carrying what they were never designed to hold. When surrender happens, desire remains, but anxiety loses its grip. There is fear involved in surrender. The fear of uncertainty, of timing, of results that differ from expectations. Yet surrender is not agreeing with the worst outcome. It is trusting God with the best one, even when it looks unfamiliar. It requires believing that God's wisdom exceeds personal understanding and that His ways, though sometimes uncomfortable, are ultimately faithful. Total surrender also involves silence, the kind that stops rehearsing arguments and stops demanding explanations. It is the quiet acceptance that God sees the full picture, including the parts hidden from human awareness. In this silence, the heart learns to wait, not with frustration, but with expectancy. Waiting becomes an act of trust rather than a punishment. When a battle is surrendered, the internal struggle often ends before the external one does. Peace enters not because circumstances change, but because alignment has been restored. The soul no longer fights God's process. This inner peace becomes strength, allowing endurance without despair. It proves that surrender does not weaken a person, it stabilizes them. Surrender also breaks cycles of exhaustion. Many people are tired not from effort, but from carrying battles they were never meant to fight alone. God invites surrender to preserve the soul. He does not demand strength beyond capacity. He offers partnership, but only when the heart is willing to release the burden. In surrender, trust is tested and refined. It is easy to trust God when outcomes align with expectations. True surrender trusts Him even when timelines stretch and answers delay. This kind of trust matures faith, moving it beyond emotional dependence into settled confidence. Faith becomes anchored, no longer swayed by immediate results. Total surrender allows God to fight on a level humans cannot reach. Some battles are spiritual, emotional, or deeply rooted in circumstances beyond visibility. Human effort addresses symptoms. God addresses roots. When surrender occurs, God engages the battle at its source, dismantling what human strength cannot confront. This surrender also restores clarity. When the mind stops racing with solutions, wisdom surfaces. God often speaks most clearly when striving ends. Direction becomes sharper, not because answers appear instantly, but because confusion fades. The heart becomes receptive again. Prayer becomes less about persuading God and more about yielding to Him. It becomes an exchange rather than a request, a moment where burdens are traded for peace. This kind of prayer strengthens intimacy with God because it is rooted in trust, not desperation. There is freedom in surrender. Freedom from self-blame, from unrealistic responsibility, and from the pressure to fix everything. God never intended humans to be their own saviors. Surrender restores proper order, placing God at the center, and humans in their rightful place of trust and obedience. Total surrender does not mean absence of action. It means action guided by God rather than driven by fear. Decisions are still made, steps are still taken, but they flow from peace instead of panic. The heart moves forward without carrying the outcome as a burden. Surrender must be renewed daily because overwhelming battles often persist longer than expected. Each day presents the temptation to take back control. Daily surrender keeps the heart aligned and prevents anxiety from rebuilding. It becomes a spiritual posture, not a one-time event. In this posture, hope remains alive. Surrender does not erase hope, it protects it. Hope rooted in God is resilient, capable of surviving delays and detours. It rests not in immediate victory, but in divine faithfulness. Total surrender ultimately transforms the meaning of the battle itself. What once felt like punishment becomes a place of encounter. What once produced fear becomes a platform for trust. The battle remains, but its power to dominate the heart fades because it no longer defines the outcome, and the soul rests in the confidence that God is actively involved. Fighting with wisdom, authority, and perfect timing. Trusting God as the divine defender begins when the heart understands that protection is not merely about escaping trouble, but about being preserved through it. Many people seek God only as a rescuer after damage has already occurred, but divine defense operates before, during, and beyond the battle. To trust God as defender is to believe that nothing touches life without passing through his authority. This trust is not denial of danger. It is confidence in God's oversight, even in the presence of threat. Human defense is limited by visibility, timing, and strength. People can only guard what they see coming, and only respond with the resources they possess. God's defense transcends these limits. He sees what is forming before it manifests, intercepts what is planned in secret, and neutralizes what human awareness never detects. Trust grows when the heart accepts that God's protection is not reactive, but intentional, woven into life at levels unseen. This trust requires releasing the need to understand every threat. Many people struggle because they want explanations before confidence. Yet faith does not require full knowledge. It requires assurance of character. Trusting God as defender means believing he is good, wise, and alert even when circumstances feel unsafe. The heart learns to rest not because it understands the battle, but because it knows the one who oversees it. Fear often rises when control feels lost. Trusting God as defender confronts this fear directly. It shifts the question from "what if this goes wrong?" to "who is watching over me?" This shift does not remove responsibility, but it removes panic. The heart becomes anchored, knowing that God's vigilance does not sleep and his attention does not waver. Divine defense is often quiet. God does not always announce what he prevents. Many dangers are avoided without awareness. Trust matures when the heart learns to thank God, not only for visible victories, but also for unseen protections. Gratitude deepens trust because it acknowledges that God has been faithful even when evidence was not obvious. Trusting God as defender also involves accepting his methods. God does not always defend by removing opposition. Sometimes he defends by strengthening endurance. At times, protection looks like preservation of peace rather than elimination of conflict. Trust grows when the heart accepts that God's ways may differ from expectations, yet remain effective. This trust reshapes responses to opposition. Instead of reacting with revenge, anxiety, or manipulation, the heart learns restraint. Knowing that God defends removes the pressure to fight every battle personally. Silence becomes strength. Patience becomes strategy, and waiting becomes an act of confidence rather than passivity. Trusting God as defender also restores dignity. Many people feel exposed when attacked by circumstances, accusations, or delays. Divine defense reassures the heart that identity is not at the mercy of external forces. God defends reputation, purpose, and destiny in ways human effort cannot. Trusting Him releases the need to constantly explain or prove oneself. This trust develops over time through experience. Each moment of preservation, each answered prayer, and each avoided disaster builds confidence. Reflection strengthens trust as the heart remembers past defenses and recognizes patterns of faithfulness. Memory becomes fuel for faith, reminding the soul that God has defended before and will defend again. Trusting God as defender also invites humility. It acknowledges that survival is not the result of intelligence or strength alone. Many outcomes are determined by grace rather than effort. This humility does not diminish confidence, it grounds it. The heart becomes secure, not in ability, but in divine covering. There are moments when defense feels delayed. Trust is tested when protection does not align with timing expectations. In these moments, the heart learns that delay does not equal absence. God's defense operates on a broader timeline, considering consequences beyond immediate comfort. Trust matures when the heart remains confident even while waiting. Trusting God as defender also brings emotional safety. Anxiety decreases when the heart believes it is guarded. Sleep becomes deeper, decisions become clearer, and reactions become calmer. Emotional stability emerges not from certainty of outcomes, but from assurance of divine involvement. This trust changes prayer. Prayer becomes less about demanding protection and more about acknowledging it. Instead of pleading from fear, the heart prays from confidence. Prayer becomes communion rather than emergency response, reinforcing trust rather than expressing desperation. Trusting God as defender strengthens obedience. When the heart believes God will protect, it becomes easier to follow difficult instructions. Fear no longer dictates decisions. The heart moves forward without constant self-preservation, trusting that obedience will not lead to destruction. This trust also dismantles the fear of people. Knowing God defends frees the heart from intimidation. Approval loses power, threats lose influence, and opinions lose control. The heart becomes anchored in divine authority rather than human reaction. Trusting God as defender allows rest even in uncertainty. Rest does not mean inactivity. It means inner calm. The heart remains alert but not anxious, engaged but not overwhelmed. This rest becomes a testimony of faith, revealing confidence that cannot be shaken by circumstances. Divine defense also includes correction. Sometimes God defends by redirecting, closing doors, or allowing discomfort that prevents greater harm. Trust accepts correction as protection, even when it feels restrictive. The heart learns that boundaries can be expressions of care. Trusting God as defender restores hope. Hope thrives when the heart believes it is not alone in the battle. Even when outcomes are unclear, hope remains because defense is assured. This hope sustains endurance, allowing the heart to persist without despair. Over time, trust becomes instinctive. The first response to threat becomes prayer rather than panic. The heart instinctively looks to God, not because of habit, but because of relationship. Confidence deepens, rooted in lived experience of divine defense. Trusting God as the divine defender ultimately redefines safety. Safety is no longer the absence of trouble, but the presence of God's oversight. The heart understands that even in danger, it is guarded. Even in uncertainty, it is covered. Even in battle, it is not alone, because God stands as protector, watcher, and defender, actively involved, fully aware and unwavering in his commitment to preserve, guide, and sustain those who place their trust in him. Receiving peace and victory through faith begins when the heart understands that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of God within it. Many people wait for battles to end before expecting peace, yet faith invites peace first, even while challenges remain unresolved. This peace is not emotional numbness or forced optimism. It is a settled assurance that God is in control. Faith receives peace as a gift, not as a reward for endurance. The heart becomes calm not because circumstances are stable, but because trust has been established. Faith shifts focus from the size of the battle to the nature of God. When attention remains fixed on problems, anxiety grows. But when faith redirects focus to God's power, peace begins to take root. This redirection is intentional. It requires the heart to resist rehearsing fears and instead rehearse truth. Peace grows where faith consistently chooses what is eternal over what is temporary. Victory through faith is often internal before it is external. Many people lose inwardly long before defeat appears outwardly. Faith prevents this inner collapse by anchoring the soul in hope. Even when outcomes are delayed, faith maintains confidence. This inner victory preserves strength, clarity, and joy, enabling endurance without despair. When the heart remains standing, circumstances lose their power to dominate. Faith receives peace by trusting God's timing. Impatience is a major thief of peace, especially when prayers seem unanswered. Faith does not rush God, it rests in Him. This rest does not mean inactivity, but confidence. Trusting God's timing releases the pressure to force outcomes and frees the heart from constant frustration. Peace grows when the soul accepts that delay does not mean denial. Victory through faith also involves perspective. Faith sees beyond the present moment. It understands that today's struggle is not the final chapter. This broader vision strengthens hope and sustains effort. When the heart believes that God is working beyond visible evidence, endurance becomes meaningful rather than exhausting. Faith transforms how pain is interpreted. Instead of viewing hardship as proof of abandonment, faith recognizes it as part of a larger process. This understanding does not minimize pain, but it gives it context. Pain loses its power to produce bitterness when faith assigns it purpose. Thoughts shape emotions, and uncontrolled thoughts magnify fear. Faith actively replaces fear-filled thoughts with truth. This mental discipline is not denial, but alignment. Peace is protected when the mind is trained to return to God's promises rather than dwell on worst-case scenarios. Victory through faith often unfolds gradually. Many expect instant breakthroughs, but faith remains effective even when progress is slow. Each step forward, no matter how small, is evidence of God's involvement. Faith celebrates these steps, reinforcing peace and strengthening confidence. Consistency becomes more important than speed. Faith also receives peace by releasing comparison. Measuring progress against others breeds discouragement. Faith personalizes the journey, trusting that God's work is unique for each life. Peace grows when the heart stops competing and starts trusting. Victory is no longer defined by outward success, but by inward alignment with God's will. Receiving peace through faith involves surrendering outcomes. Anxiety often comes from attachment to specific results. Faith releases these attachments not because desires disappear, but because trust deepens. The heart becomes flexible, confident that God's outcome will be right, even if it differs from expectation. This flexibility protects peace. Victory through faith strengthens resilience. Faith does not prevent challenges, but it equips the heart to recover quickly. Setbacks no longer define identity or direction. Faith reframes failure as feedback, allowing growth without condemnation. Peace remains intact because confidence rests in God's faithfulness, not personal performance. Faith also invites divine strength. Human endurance has limits, but faith connects the heart to supernatural supply. This strength manifests as patience, clarity, courage, and hope. Peace becomes sustainable because it is supported by God's power rather than human effort. Victory follows because strength is renewed daily. Receiving peace through faith reshapes prayer. Prayer becomes less about pleading and more about trusting. The heart prays with expectation rather than desperation. This posture reinforces peace because it affirms belief in God's responsiveness. Prayer becomes a place of exchange where anxiety is replaced with assurance. Faith protects peace by anchoring identity. When identity is rooted in God rather than circumstances, external changes lose their power to disturb inner stability. Faith reminds the heart of who it is and whose it is. This identity produces confidence that survives uncertainty and opposition. Victory through faith also influences actions. Decisions made in faith are calmer, wiser, and less reactive. Peace guides choices, preventing impulsive responses driven by fear. Faith produces discernment, allowing the heart to move forward without regret. Receiving peace through faith includes gratitude. Gratitude shifts attention from what is missing to what is present. Faith recognizes blessings even in difficulty. This recognition fuels peace because it acknowledges God's ongoing involvement. Gratitude becomes evidence of trust. Faith sustains peace during waiting seasons, waiting tests, patience, but faith transforms waiting into preparation. The heart remains hopeful, believing that God is active even when silent. Peace grows in this trust, replacing restlessness with expectation. Victory through faith ultimately redefines success. Success is no longer measured solely by visible outcomes, but by inner alignment with God. Peace becomes the evidence of victory, proof that the battle no longer controls the heart. Faith declares victory not only at the end, but throughout the journey. As faith deepens, peace becomes consistent. The heart learns to remain calm across changing circumstances. Confidence stabilizes emotions, and trust becomes instinctive. Victory unfolds naturally because the soul is no longer divided between fear and faith. In the end, receiving peace and victory through faith means living from assurance rather than anxiety, from trust rather than tension, from hope rather than fear. It is choosing to believe God's promises over present pressures and resting in His faithfulness regardless of circumstances. This faith does not remove challenges, but it removes their power to steal peace. It does not eliminate battles, but it guarantees victory of the heart. And when the heart stands firm in faith, peace reigns, strength is renewed, and life moves forward with confidence, knowing that God is faithful, God is present, and God will complete what He has begun.